it was on that basis that I said the president really, if he's not able to say what happened, if he's not willing to take the public into his confidence for an indefinite period of time, then perhaps he should step aside, allow this investigation that is being talked about to take place and continue. And when that is finished, and hopefully if it cleared him of any wrongdoing, he would be able to resume his position.
Hello, my name is Donald, and welcome to the #1 media company, WorldView. Here at WorldView, we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. Today, we have with us Mavuso Msimang. Mavuso is an ANC veteran and former member of uMkhonto with Sizwe, where he served on the military high command. He has occupied a wide range of roles in environmental management, private enterprise, and government enterprises. He is the former CEO of South African National Parks. Mavuso, welcome. It's such a great pleasure to have you on our show.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm curious and eager to talk to you.
Mavuso, what was the journey like to uMkhonto with Sizwe? How did you end up in the military wing of the African National Congress?
Well, this is how it happened. At high school, at Inkamana High School, a Catholic school in Vryheid, KwaZulu-Natal, I got introduced into politics. One of the students was already a very strong member of the ANC in Durban, and we started a cell, an ANC branch, so to say. This is 1958 or so. So that's when I started really having an interest in politics, in the sense of actually even belonging to an organization. I went very briefly to Fort Hare University, and when I got there in 1962, the ANC had already been banned in 1960, and it had, however, gone underground and was working in those structures. We had a cell structure that was called the M plan. I always get confused as to what this M stand for, whether it was Mandela, I think it was something else. But that plan was structured in such a way that 5 people belonged together, and each one of the 5 would also go and form another cell of 5. The idea being that the different cells of 5 do not know altogether about the existence each of the other than through, yes, they should not really. It didn't always work like that. People got to know about that. So when I got to Fort Hare, I was appointed to the high command, which coordinated all the structures. And there again was politics, getting deeper and deeper into politics. We organized a lot of boycotts of politicians. Fort Hare was traditionally a Black university, which goes back in history to a long time. I think 1926, perhaps even earlier, but it had been made a tribal university. The way I got there, I had to sneak into that. They had started other universities, such as, it's called KwaZulu-Natal University now, but it was called Ongoye, where Zulus, I speak Zulu. The Zulu speakers.
Mavuso, sorry, really sorry. Can you perhaps just lean a bit closer to the mic or speak a bit louder?
Oh, okay.
No, the university, and really sorry.
Yeah, okay. So I went to Fort Hare and joined the ANC underground structures. I was appointed to the high command there, not quite sure why, but it was quite a representative structure. And we really got involved very seriously in ANC politics underground, because the organization had been banned in 1960. We were accountable to another underground structure in Port Elizabeth. That was the regional command structure. When we got involved in organizing boycotts and doing leaflets denouncing the apartheid education system, it became very clear that sooner or later we would be arrested. And so I was advised, together with 5 other people, to leave the country and finish my studies abroad. The arrest was imminent. In fact, on the day that we left, the police arrived at our hostel looking for us, but they found that we'd gone. So we got onto a train from the Eastern Cape to Johannesburg, and stayed in Soweto for a while, a short while we're met by somebody at the park station, and we remained while the trip was being arranged, when arrangements were being made to take us abroad. So eventually this did happen. I think it was almost 2 months or so later, but I had an alibi there. For the police asked what I was doing in Joburg. I was attending a conference, a NUSAS conference. NUSAS was the National Union of South African Students. We collaborated with them as an ANC student organization. We left South Africa. I left South Africa illegally through the border what's this thing now? I forget it. But into Botswana. And in Botswana, we caught a train that took us to Francistown. And in Francistown, there was a big camp for refugees from Southern Africa. There were Zimbabweans, there were Namibians, quite a number in that camp. The name of the camp was called the White House. So while we were there, a big event that was to change many people's lives, mine definitely, the leadership of the African National Congress was arrested in Rivonia. That is, you know about that. Mandela had already been arrested because he had left the country and come back, and while he was disguised as a driver, that caught him and sent him to jail. But the rest of his co-leaders were arrested, and in Rivonia, it was really a huge setback. And the decision that I made while sitting in Francistown, awaiting the allocation of a place, a scholarship, was that I should find out if there were not more urgent things I could do. And it was agreed that I could join uMkhonto with Sizwe. That was the relevant university. So that's how I joined uMkhonto with Sizwe in Francistown. We were flown to Dar es Salaam through Malawi for refueling. And when we got to Dar es Salaam, in a short course, it was arranged for me to join another group of people who had already trained in Egypt at the time, and we went to train in Moscow. They were doing a retraining for 2 reasons. One was the conditions were not ready for them to be sent back to South Africa, but also it had been decided that the training should focus more on urban guerrilla warfare. And the Egyptians had not given them that. It's good training, but not in guerrilla warfare. So when we went to Moscow, September in 1963, we lived in a dacha, these houses that used to belong to kulaks and foreign people. And there were 23 of us, and we then were given lessons in guerrilla warfare, which making homemade explosives, how to shoot, how to assemble a gun, and all the things, topography, and politics, of course. So we were done in 11 months, and we traveled to Tanzania, and we were given a place, a temporary place to stay while it was a transit camp, while awaiting assignment back to South Africa. This place was called Kongwa in central Tanzania, and also in the same area, other liberation movements like Frelimo, SWAPO of Namibia, and I think ZAPU of Zimbabwe were there for a brief time before they proceeded to start their revolutions in their own countries. So I was there then. So we had thought we would not stay for longer than a year at most, and following which we would be on our way back to South Africa. But it was obviously, of course, a serious miscalculation. I think it was a product of naivety to think that you could find your way in such a short time through a Zambia that had become independent in 1964. They had been very helpful on our way up because they were still fighting for their own independence, but now they were in charge. But in charge of the police and the army were British officers, and it was very clear that there was no way you would want to go through a place like that, although it was an independent country. The alliances, the loyalties to the white regime governments in the South was very strong. So we would sneak our way through Zambia and be there illegally, and yeah. So I was then but it took a long time before people could leave this place, which was supposed to be a short-term transit camp, because
Mavuso, what was the conditions like in these camps? Was it quite a horrible place to live in? Was it a good place to live in?
Yeah, actually excellent conditions. What I can say for the ANC is that it always treated its cadres, military cadres, trained cadres, very, very well when conditions permitted. We had good food, but we had to, the conditions were Spartan in the sense that we lived in tents, like the military people. We were in uniform, and we cooked, we did everything like soldiers do. But the food was good. We had meat almost every other day, perhaps. No, the diet was good. So I was then assigned, I think about 6 months or so after arriving in Congo, I was assigned to, I should say that I had trained in communication, radio communication, high frequency in Moscow. And we were taught how to operate handheld radios, but also there was a big base station. I was sent to Zambia, Lusaka, to set up a station there, a radio station, to communicate initially with head office in Tanzania, and eventually I was to set up a station in Livingstone and make arrangements for the people who were proceeding south across the Zambezi and be in a position to communicate with them. So I think on the basis of this training and communication, when Jerome Mudise formed, who was the commander-in-chief at the time. This title changed in time. The commander-in-chief was the leader of the ANC, Oliver Tambo, was made commander-in-chief. And I think the head of MK was the commander of MK, and there would be a deputy and so on. So I was in Zambia in 1965, setting up the station, and we started doing our communication internally. And I would also go down to Livingston to look at, to do some reconnaissance together with people who were in that group, and look at where to cross the river into Botswana and possibly into Zimbabwe, Rhodesia then. So I was then appointed into the high command structure of uMkhonto Sizwe, and my responsibility was to look after communication. Shortly afterward, I think around 1966, late 66, discussions took place between the ANC and ZAPU about to discuss the possibility of forming a joint operational structure. The ANC's aim being to use Zimbabwe as a transit point to South Africa. And since they were already engaged in an armed struggle in their own right, there would be no problem really with us taking up a fight. It was a common enemy. You know, the Rhodesians and the South Africans were really all working together to stop any revolution taking place in the two countries. So that was formed, and together with ZAPU people, I think I also went into the command structure, the joint high command structure of ZIPRA being the Zimbabwe People's Revolutionary Army, and MK. And we then started planning the routes south. The understanding was that some of the MK people would stay in Zimbabwe and prepare the ground for future people coming across and assist them to travel south into South Africa. But there was a small group of people who, during the infiltration in 1967, were assigned to go straight to South Africa, and among them was, of course, our famous Chris Hani. And I need to say that it was a very difficult mission. In fact, it was mission impossible. It's an assignment that was done in reaction to pressure for us also to start doing something about going to South Africa. We'd been, as I indicated earlier, back in Tanzania, 1964, and this was now 1967, 3 years later. Frelimo in Mozambique had started fighting. In Angola, they started fighting in their own countries. Yes, in Zimbabwe, the fighting had already started low-key, but it was happening. And SWAPO, I think, of Namibia, were also making a move to start their liberation struggle. Staying in Congo for much longer than the year that people expected they would be there for, started creating very serious moral problems. A lot of, well, people started becoming restless. Initially, they said, we want to go home. You said we would not be here for long. we want to go and fight. But it was clear that there was no way. The preparations had just not, adequate preparations had not been put in place.
And Mavuso, how did the future leaders of the ANC handle the situation? Did you, for example, know people like Jacob Zuma or Chris Hani personally? How were they in these situations? How did they handle themselves?
Well, Jacob Zuma was in prison. He started, I think when they tried to, I believe, leave the country, I don't know when. Zuma was not in the first lot of people. So he spent some 10 years in prison, I think, and only came out in the 70s. Chris Hani and I were in the same group in Moscow. We were in two groups, but we didn't know. The Russians were very good with security. And so although they were training two South African groups, they were supposed to keep us apart. And we didn't quite know that we were all in Moscow. But when we finished around the same time, Chris's group and my group, and we traveled to this Congo that I was talking about, we arrived around the same time. Chris was in the military structure in Congo, a temporary one, as a political commissar. But really, these were things to keep us going because no one really was expecting that we'll be there for long. So this Wankie thing that I'm talking about, Chris was one of the strongest advocates. What I can say about him is that if he could help it, he wasn't going to spend one day outside South Africa if there was a way in which he would go to South Africa. He was always very determined and very courageous. You see, I talked about that crossing of the Zambezi River and said it was mission impossible. What made it possible was the high level of morale. Chris was one of the strongest influences. If we were to go home, and Chris was one of the people who said, we must go, and he was there. He put his foot where his mouth was. It really, I mean, morale was extremely, extremely high among the people. But the preparations were not good. I was saying to you that we were reacting because people started deserting Congo because they were not going home. Having been there for 2 years and 3, people just thought there are other things that we can do in the meantime. So they crossed the border to Kenya, and others asked for scholarships, but not many got scholarships at that point. But you also had a lot of pressure from what was called the OAU, Organization of African Unity. It changed its name to African Unity. AU now, yeah. That guys, you've been here since 1964, and what's happening? When are you starting to fight at home? I think, quite frankly, if the truth be told, it was in reaction to that kind of pressure to do something that the campaign that ended up being called the Wankie campaign was planned. There would have been nothing wrong, really, with using the territory strategically in this and politically, in the sense that ZAPU, the Zimbabwe African People's Union, and us had been really allies anyway, politically. I think I need to say also that in each of the unliberated countries, there happens always to have been 2 liberation movements. In South Africa, you had the ANC and the Pan-Africanist Congress. In Zimbabwe, you had the ZAPU, and then you had ZANU, the Zimbabwe African National Union, under Sithole and then later Mugabe. Mozambique had Frelimo, and it had something called UNAMO. So the point of this is that ZAPU, ANC, Frelimo, the MPLA, SWAPO, and up in West Africa, the PIGC, considered themselves authentic liberation movements from their respective countries. And we always worked together in presenting our cases for support, material support, mainly from the OAU. So we're really strong allies. You must mark that I said.
And uMkhonto would not be considered a liberation force because they pursued non-violent.
They never came out of South Africa. Did they even exist at the time? No, they were not. The liberation movements who took up arms and went to exile, because see, one thing also that needs to be known about these countries, and in particular South Africa, is that if you were going to fight a war or so, engage in armed struggle, guerrilla, or you would not be able, you would need to go and receive your training abroad, because the army did not recruit Black people. And so, unlike other countries where, like Algeria, there was an army there, in Morocco and Egypt, I mean, Egypt didn't, you already had people in the army, so there was really no pressing need to train people externally. That's why a lot of trained people had to go to exile to receive their training in case of South Africa. But so I was saying that the campaign that ended, the 1967 campaign, which ended up being called the Wankie campaign, because this is where the enemy, the Rhodesians, detected the presence of our people, and fighting started. They started pursuing them, and there were ambushes, there were skirmishes, there was fighting, people died, but fortunately, just don't have to take it to was saying about Jay. There's a new kind of guerrilla who was coming. So this was because once the Rhodesians found out we were in the country, I mean, then from the air and road and all over the people, and they retreated, our people did, into Botswana strategically, because there they hoped that they would be arrested, and they were not going to fight the Botswana. Botswana was a member of the AU, which supported the liberation struggle. And so it happened. In fact, Chris, since we talk about him, was one of the people who retreated from the battlefield in Western Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, into Botswana, and they surrendered there and spent about 2.5 years in prison, Botswana. And when they finished their term, the Zambian president, the Zambian government, offered to take them back. South Africans, the apartheid people wanted to say, these are our terrorists, we need them here. But Botswana agreed to repatriate them to Zambia. So after the lessons of what I would call the Wankie campaign, we made much better preparations and went to the eastern part of Zimbabwe, northeast for Zimbabwe, to look for opportunities of getting people in there. I mean, for 3 full months, we were in Rhodesia without the authorities being aware of our presence. Eventually, we know how to tell the story. They did discover that we were there, and fighting broke out. And I have to tell you, for the sake of the correctness of history, our people fought well, but morale was not as high as it was in the Wankie campaign. Suffered quite a few casualties, So those, a number of people who were caught there were sentenced in what's Harare now, Salisbury. They were sentenced to death, some of them, and mostly that, yes. And they were, I think, in time, their sentences were commuted to life. And I understand that this happened because, in terms of the law in Rhodesia, you could not kill more than so many people, execute more than so many people per annum. So in time, some of the sentences were commuted to life. And when freedom came in 1980, thanks to ZANU in particular, they won. Mugabe was the president. The people were released from prison and went back to join the ANC in Zimbabwe, in Tanzania and Zambia. So that was the story around my involvement in the early encounters with the enemy. We reorganized. Morale took a dive, tried in two places. We had, I think people had accounted themselves very well, but we remained where we were and really didn't make much of a dent in terms of coming back to South Africa. It was a time to reorganize. There was some unhappiness about the state of politics in exile. There were two groups: the uMkhonto Sizwe, the armed group whose focus was going into South Africa, and you had the leadership, the political group, who were doing international work. And it didn't seem that there was a melding of the two, coordinated in such a way that what they did in the international solidarity work would be linked to, would support the efforts that were being done in the military. So a lot of reorganization took place between 1968, 69, and that resulted in the holding of a conference in Morogoro. It's one of the major calendar events in the struggle, the Morogoro Conference of 1969. It's a conference that included all ANC people, represented people from uMkhonto Sizwe, as well as people who came from different missions, the political international group, solidarity group, but also non-ANC people, patriots from South Africa were invited to this meeting. And it was, I think, it was a landmark meeting, and it reorganized the ANC, resulted in the formation of what was called a Revolutionary Council. The important thing about that is that prior to banishment of the African National Congress in South Africa in 1960, apartheid had forced the organized along racial or ethnic lines. You had the African National Congress working in African areas. You had the Colored People's Congress, South African Indian Congress, and there was a Congress of Democrats. So when the ANC was banned, not all the institutions, not all the other organizations were banned, but it became virtually very, very difficult for them to operate. So the question was how point I want to make is that you had people of Indian background, colored background. I hate these terminologies, this terminology. But we had these people who were not ANC members, because of the demographic arrangements that I was talking about imposed. It was called the Group Areas Act, which placed people in separate areas based on their race. So you had people joining uMkhonto with Sizwe who were members of the Indian Congress, but not members of the African National Congress, members of the Colored People's Congress, and not of the other. The attempts were made, efforts started to be made to regularize this kind of situation. The formation of the Revolutionary Council, which reported to the National Executive Committee of the ANC. In that structure, you had people of all races who qualified to be in there. It took another 5-6 years before people of other races were admitted into the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress. It was a bit of a complex situation. One needed to be careful how you handle that, because to suddenly become a member of a banned organization when your own organization back in South Africa was not banned just incriminated you for those people who found themselves in that kind of situation. So there you had people like Joe Slovo, Yusuf Dadu, Dr. Dadu, and Reggie September, kind of without anybody saying you are representing Indians and you that, but de facto you had those leaders, and they happened to be leaders of the other organizations, were accepted into the ANC in a very senior position, but also in a structure that was involved in directing the war into South Africa.
Isn't it also at Morogoro that you adopted the People's War and reaffirmed yourself to the National Democratic Revolution?
Yes, the Morogoro Conference is where the rearrangement of the operational organizational structure of the ANC took place. National Democratic Revolution, those things that I think that's a concept that actually comes from socialists, communists, you know, in their analysis of the political development of society. They have political organizations starting at a feudal state to a capitalist state, to a society becoming socialist, but before it became communist. But, you know, the transition from capitalist to communism or even to socialism would take time. It was recognized. And there was a period when you would be in a national democratic revolution and so on. So yes, we used that to describe the state in which the African National Congress was as it came back to South Africa. It wasn't a socialist party or organization, definitely not. But it was fighting against capitalism. Not everybody necessarily wanting to be socialist, as was the case in the Eastern Bloc. You know, you had Russia, Ukraine, the Soviet Union at the time together, and 15 states which belonged to this thing. But they were, the West called them communist states, but they regarded themselves as socialist states because the communist state could only be attained once certain conditions were reached.
And okay, Mavuso, I'd like to speak about your current position where you've called for President Ramaphosa to resign. Why have you called for President Ramaphosa to step aside?
It's that this came about as a result of the revelations that were made by Arthur Fraser, who went to the police station reported that the police went to the police to charge President Ramaphosa with corruption and money laundering, things like that. So that's something that had happened 2 years earlier, and clearly Arthur Fraser, who had some grievance against the president, did that primarily to get even with him. But it was quite a dramatic, a sensational kind of the disclosures of monies in mattresses, monies being stolen, and of all these things that were taking place in the country. It really had the potential of being a scandal, and the president reacted to that in a manner that did not help the situation, because while he did not accept the story of Arthur Fraser in total, he did concede that there was money that was stolen, and that it was quite a bit of cash. And he said it had the money had been realized from the sale of game and spatial domestic animals, the Ankole breed, and so on. So but when the media asked the president to tell them a little more about this thing that he was admitting had taken place on his farm, Palapala, he was reticent. He said, listen, it's likely this man is gone to the police station, and we should allow the law to take its course. And I will not say anymore. All too often it's been happening that when people don't really want to disclose, they cite the sub judice thing. I, like many other comrades, were very worried that this is likely to explode in the hands of the president, and it was going to be extremely detrimental to the African National Congress. The president of the Republic needed to tell the public what actually happened, a little more than he had been willing to concede. Not disclosing and saying he's waiting for legal processes to be finished. No one knows how long. They haven't even started, by the way. He has not been charged, he may not be charged. But how long would the nation wait before it understood clearly what took place there? Because what was being alleged sounded very alarming, sounded very criminal, to say the least. I thought that it's important for the president to really open up, take the nation, as they say, into his confidence, and say, listen, this is what happened, nothing to worry about, but let's get, the matter will be resolved in the courts. But essentially, yes, there was money, since he had already said there was money. It got to be there because of ABC, and et cetera, et cetera. You see, I think the problem was that not saying how the money got to be there when you had admitted that it was there, not clarifying whether there was any hard currency when this person alleged that there was, would just leave too many questions and would lead to the kind of suspicions and attacks that are happening at the moment. It was on that basis that I said the president really, if he's not able to say what happened, if he's not willing to take the public into his confidence for an indefinite period of time, then perhaps he should step aside, allow this investigation that is being talked about to take place and continue. And when that is finished, and hopefully if it cleared him of any wrongdoing, he would be able to resume his position. So
and I saw the interview you did on Biz News, and you mentioned the idea of a caretaker president. Would you see as the perfect candidate to be the caretaker president while the investigation is ongoing?
Well, the decision really would depend very much on the ANC. He is the ANC president. If they were to go that route, when a president either resigns, whether it's for a short term, which doesn't happen often, I think the arrangements constitutionally may be that his deputy would take charge. But given the current state of the ANC, a number of colleagues thought it would be good for the country not to have a president who is saddled with this pala thing at a time when everything just seemed to be going wrong. Petrol prices going up, food prices going up, crime shooting up, people being killed here, there, and everywhere. ESCOM not working, that requires the attention of the president, 100% of his attention, more if he could do that. But have to be trying to answer allegations or unable to answer allegations about what happened in Palapala would just compromise his ability to discharge his responsibilities as the president of the country. So if he agreed to step down and the African National Congress leadership accepted that it would be a good thing for the party and for the country, then it would be arranged that that a person who enjoyed the respect of the party in the first instance and of the public, because they were not tarnished in any way, should be perhaps given the assignment of running the affairs of the ANC and the state, but particularly to me, of the state, until such time as the Palapala thing was resolved. It's not something, this would be done by people who appreciated that there would be an advantage to the state if that were to be done. And there's really no doubt that a person who was not in any way affected by a scandal and who had the blessing of the party, if they were given and if Parliament cleared that candidature, then the country would continue until this matter of Palapala was resolved, or until the next elections in 2024. And then, by the way, the ANC people would continue with their conference in December. They would elect the leadership, the top six, national executive, and they would do all of that. And whoever was appointed or elected president would, in due course, take over the responsibility, certainly of the ANC. And if the ANC still had, if it was before 2024, and of the state once they were sworn into power.
And Mavuso, do you agree with the former President Thabo Mbeki we just made a speech at JC Duarte's funeral, or a eulogy, where he said that if things don't change, if the ANC doesn't take leadership or action, we will see an Arab Spring in South Africa. Do you agree with the former president?
You know, there is absolutely no doubt that our situation, the nation is facing a crisis. I mean, a short while ago, I was referring to the outages, or what they call it, downloading, which affects people very directly, extremely negatively, in their private capacity as consumers of electricity, for domestic use and so on. And even more so in just putting some gridlock into the economy. You know, that has taken its harsh toll. The lack of power of energy affects the economy. The government, over 2/3 of them who are not in employment. Otherwise, it's at 35, I think. The cost of food is intolerable. I mean, food is just not affordable. Transport becomes very expensive because of the petrol price, but also because the public that would use trains doesn't have sufficient access to trains because the railway sleepers and other things have been stolen. So it's really a very difficult time for the people. I don't know, I'm not good at predicting what might happen and so on, but it wouldn't be surprising at all. I mean, you're getting shooting for reasons that are not explained, and the police are taking time, if they do even succeed, to arrest the culprit. So there is really a state that is very close to lawlessness. In such conditions, I think anything can be expected. So I think Thabo Mbeki was right. I don't think he was dramatizing it. And all this is happening while the African National Congress leadership seems to be really deeply mired in factional internal disputes, which is not assisting the management of the country at all.
And do you think one of the reasons why we're at this current point is because of the policy of cater deployment?
Oh, it's many reasons. Corruption has contributed tremendously to this thing. Well, the Ukraine situation of late has been a factor. The petrol price, I mean, I know it's not determined here, but if it affects people here, it certainly is a factor in the crisis. But there's no doubt about the fact that the crisis, the corruption in the country, which affects people in the leadership of the ANC, has contributed a great deal to the state of uncertainty, to this crisis, current crisis.
What do you think of the idea of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the people that have been implicated in corruption?
I really don't know. That would be an option only and only if the state was unable to carry out its task. What I would expect right now is that with the Zondo Commission having made its recommendations, with the institutions, criminal justice system strengthened, it is important not just to punish the people involved in these things, but so that people know that when you do these kinds of things, you don't get truth and reconciliation commissions taking place all the time. It would be a very effective deterrent, but also really, not only should people who have been involved in reducing the state to this condition, not only should they be arrested, the most important thing is to recover as much of the money that was taken as possible. What will not be recovered quickly is the restoration of the functioning of the institutions that have been destroyed. I mean, parastatals, state-owned agencies, we all know what's happened to the leadership at Eskom, Transnet, at PRASA, Petro SA, SAA, even the South African Broadcasting Corporation. They've been affected by the management of the politics and the economy by the ANC, but by the infiltration. State capture actually defined means, getting vested nefarious interests, worming them into the state structures and getting them to carry out their own objectives, corrupt objectives. We have been captured, and that can't be a small matter. That has contributed a lot to the high level of unemployment. Yes, COVID also. I mean, not looking for excuses or things. The fact of the matter is that, yes, COVID and the lockdowns also affected the economy very, very big time. But as somebody has pointed out, countries in a comparable development situation to South Africa have not been as hard hit as ourselves in terms of levels of unemployment and the ability to recover from the effects of lockdowns.
Mavuso, what's very interesting to me is many people like Rob Hersov and Herman Mashaba have said that if Nelson Mandela were alive today, he would vote for the Democratic Alliance. But I think many people underestimate the influence of ideology in politics. And I don't see a person like Nelson Mandela voting for a party that's a liberal party. What do you think is the chances of a person like Nelson Mandela voting for
It's such a hypothetical case. Anyway, we shouldn't spend too much on that. We can't test it. But I can tell you, there is just no way. First of all, the situation, if the good leadership of the past was still around, situation would not have deteriorated to this stage. So the question of them voting for something that they would have allowed to get to the stage, no, the DA was not able to understand that 1994 happened and that this country needs, in terms of democratic leadership, demographically, you really need to see more and more Black people, Black in its widest sense, in leadership positions. And also a recognition that apartheid actually kept people out of the economy. A lot of the people who were not white were just kept out of the economy. Yes, it's true that the affirmative action or the BE has taken place. I'll be the first one to admit that it has been fairly badly managed, and in fact, it's just left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. But there is no way ever it's an insult to Mandela, to Zulu, Tambo, and many others whose names we don't know, who died for the liberation of this country, who would be very, very upset. I think they would roll their sleeves and get the ANC to function. They wouldn't run to the DA or any other organization. Absolutely not.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well. Mavuso, my last question. You were the CEO of the South African National Parks. What is your opinion of the current state of a park like the Kruger National Park? Because it seems like it's become quite dilapidated. It's gone quite backwards. What is your opinion of the situation in a place like the Kruger National Park?
Well, I didn't really think it had gone that bad. I think the public service has been affected by these things that we're talking about. The Sun Parks, South African National Parks, has recently suffered. Its CEO has, for almost the best part of the last 12 months, been involved in cases. He's been under suspension, and so it affects the performance of the organization. I think they are soldiering on, to be honest with you, under difficult conditions. There are many institutions which suffered a lot more from COVID, from corruption, and so on. Much more, in my opinion, than Sun Parks. I think they're trying their best, and it's difficult. You must know that parks rely also on tourism, and tourism was very much stifled, just rendered almost inoperable as a result of COVID and other things. I have faith, to be honest with you, in Sun Parks. I think they'll pull through.
Well, Mavuso, thank you so much. I see our time has run out. Thank you for honoring the show with your presence. I want to give you one last opportunity if you want to say something or answer a question that you'd hope I'd ask you.
If you were to ask me, a lot of these things, first of all, I'm busy wiping tears. I hope some of that can be clipped out where you can. I think a lot of people ask me what I think will happen to the African National Congress. Is it going to survive going forward? And my answer, my honest answer, is that it's going to be very, very difficult for the African National Congress to come back to its former glory, certainly not in the short term. I agree with many people that based on its current performance, it's highly, highly unlikely to get an outright majority in the national elections in 2024. This is going to result in a state of coalitions in South Africa. Those are not easy to run, and they require a lot of maturity by the participants in coalitions, but also the participants in the coalitions ought themselves to be people of integrity who are very clear about commitment to the welfare of the people. I mean, we have the most unequal country on earth. We have more than 50%, I think it's about 50% of our population living below officially poverty level. They're poor. It's an untenable situation. How do coalition people deal with these things? The tendency right now is for organizations, parties to form themselves around, unfortunately in some cases, ethnic issues. The Western Cape has been wanting to leave this country. But you also have people who feel that what are called colored people are not getting the right. They were not white enough in the past. They're not black enough now. All these things are not really contributing very much to the very cardinal principle that is a non-racial South Africa. It's not a dream. In fact, we will be strongest when we cease to be looking at each other as Indians or whatever. There are serious problems of development. Some of our constitution really gives us the opportunity to move forward. There are strengths from each of the groups that constitute South Africa. And unless those are optimized, unless those are brought together to produce a good South Africa, then, and I'm not sure that the future governments of the ANC are quite prepared for that. They'll learn along the way and maybe we'll find a way, but that will not be before things have gotten worse.
Well, thank you, Mavuso. I love that message, and I think a lot of our viewers will love that message. To our viewers, if you've made it this far, you most certainly enjoy this content. Please like this video, share it as widely as possible to spread that message, and subscribe to our channel. My name is Donald, and you've been watching WorldView.